All right, thank you for joining us for our webinar on Laudato Si, presented by Father Frank DeSiano.
Hi, good afternoon. Thank you for being part of our webinar today. We're calling this webinar Pope Francis and the integrity, living with integrity. But that word integrity will have a lot of meaning as we go through. I really want this look at the encyclical to be done very much from the point of view of evangelization. What does our awareness of the environment, our care of creation have to do with the meaning of evangelization itself? When Pope Francis put out his second encyclical, he had two prayers at the end. He also had a prayer from St. Francis in the middle of it. But this is one of the prayers at the end, a Christian prayer in union with creation. People find this very powerful. So let's begin by praying this. Father, we praise you with all your creatures. They came forth from your all-powerful hand. They are yours. Filled with your presence and your tender love. Praise be to you. Son of God, Jesus, through you all things were made. You were formed in the womb of Mary, our mother. You became part of this earth, and you gazed upon this world with human eyes. Today, you are alive in every creature in your risen glory. Praise be you. Holy Spirit, by your light, you guide this world toward the Father's love and accompany creation as it groans in travail. You also dwell in our hearts, and you inspire us to do what is good. Praised be you. Triune Lord, wondrous community of infinite love, teach us to contemplate you in the beauty of the universe, for all things speak of you. Awaken our praise and thankfulness for every being that you have made. Give us the grace to feel profoundly joined to everything that is. God of love, show us our place in this world as channels of your love for all the creatures of this earth, for not one of them is forgotten in your sight. Enlighten those who possess power and money that they may avoid the sin of indifference and that they may love the common good, advance the weak, and care for this world in which we live. The poor and the earth are crying out. O Lord, seize us with your power and light. Help us to protect all life, to prepare for a better future, for the coming of your kingdom of justice, peace, love, and beauty. Praise be you. Amen. That prayer actually encompasses many of the themes that we will be looking at in Laudato Si. Pope Francis organizes the encyclical according to these points, these kind of chapter headings, reviewing aspects of our current ecological crisis, principles from our Judeo-Christian tradition, exploring the roots of our present situation, advancing broad proposals for dialogue and action, and offering inspired guidelines. But this, by the way, is the second encyclical. The Joy of the Gospel was not an encyclical, but an apostolic exhortation because it was written in response to a synod. So this second encyclical, we are going to look at particularly from the dimensions of evangelization. And as I read this encyclical, and it's a hefty piece of work, it takes a lot, but the more you read it, the more enriched you are. I saw in this encyclical a direct parallel between our story of creation, salvation, creation, fall, and redemption, and the relationships that the Pope is exploring. This harmonious relationship, which is the way it should be, the way creation should be, the distortion of vision and activity, which replicates the fall, the sin of Adam and Eve, and then the restoration of relationship, which represents redemption, what Jesus does for us. So these are the ways in which I'm going to organize the material in this encyclical, just so we get some sense of the evangelizing and dramatic evangelizing power of this encyclical. There is an original vision, kind of like a creation itself. And Pope Francis says this right near the beginning of his letter. Rather than a problem to be solved, the world is a joyful mystery to be contemplated with gladness and praise. So right there he's setting up maybe some fundamental attitudes with which we look at creation. Is there something the matter with it and we got to do something about it? And what are the things we're doing about it? And what's the cost we're paying for some of the things we're doing about it? Or is it, first of all, a mystery to be contemplated and can only be seen, if you will, can only be engaged with through gladness, praise, and joy? So there are some very, very idealistic images of creation that are run through this encyclical, and you can get this kind of a sense, if you will, almost of an original innocence, a way in which the first man, the first woman, the first humans comported in a fullness of integrity with their God and with creation. So Francis says, the creation accounts in the book of Genesis contain, in their own symbolic and narrative language, profound teachings about human existence and its historical reality. They suggest that human life is grounded in three fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with Earth itself. So the image that Francis is putting here is that when we are living with integrity, with the wholeness, the wholesomeness that should be part of our existence, there is a natural and spontaneous relationship with God, with neighbor, and with Earth. And when that integrity is broken, there is disruption among all of those relationships, neighbor and Earth. In number 70 here, the Pope continues this thinking. Disregard for the duty to cultivate and maintain a proper relationship with my neighbor, for whose care and custody I am responsible, ruins my relationship with my own self, with others, with God, and the earth. When all these relationships are neglected, then justice no longer dwells in the land, and the Bible tells us that life itself can be endangered. So this is furthering the Pope's theme about this integrity and the relationships, that when I stop caring about the people around me, all kinds of things begin to happen and all kinds of changes take place in the deepest part of myself, my relational self, my relational life. And so the encyclical is exploring a disruption, if you will, a way in which our attitude toward Earth is mirroring the fall of Adam and Eve, their primal sin of not trusting in God, of wanting to control life and dictate life for themselves. There's a way in which that is being replicated through the disruptions that are happening in our own human activity. And this is what Pope Francis is inviting us to explore. Again, talking about how interrelated everything is in number 52, we need to strengthen the conviction that we are one single human family. There are no frontiers or barriers, political or social, behind which we can hide. Still less is there room for the globalization of indifference. So here, Francis is being deliberately provocative, because he's taking this word globalization that we have tossed around for the past 10 years as if it's an ideal. Globalization is great. We should all be globalized, and we've all drawn closer to each other. And he says that that same globalization, which carries so much potential, can also be fraught with so much danger. Because if indifference is globalized, then what happens? And certainly what we see so often in terms of wars and the refugee situations, the terrible consequences of that, are all ways in which this interrelationship is being broken, and humankind and Earth are all paying a big, big price. Now, one of the ways to think about this disruption is through a kind of disproportion. Now, the Holy Father is talking about earth, neighbor, and self being in a kind of, and God being in a harmonious relationship. But one of the things he points to is what he calls a false anthropocentrism. Now, there's a big word. You use that in Scrabble. You see, you get a few 3- and 4-point letters right there. But anthropocentrism means this is all about me. This is all about us. This is all about humankind and not about anything else. And so Francis is saying, an inadequate presentation of Christian anthropology gave rise to a wrong understanding of the relationship between human beings and the world. Often, what was handed on was a Promethean vision of mastery over the world, which gave the impression that the protection of nature was something that only the faint-hearted cared about. And of course, he is alluding to that magnificent part in the story of creation in Genesis, where God says to the man and the woman, you have mastery over all creation. And what does that mean? And how does that mastery get distorted? How does it become disproportionate? Number 75, the best way to restore men and women to their rightful place, putting an end to their claim to absolute dominion over the earth, is to speak once more of the figure of a Father who creates and who alone owns the world. Otherwise, human beings will always try to impose their own laws and interests on reality. So right away, the Pope is saying, when you think this is all about you, when we think this is all about us, when we think this is all about what we want or what we think we have to get, we have to begin beholding the Father, that fountain of absolutely generous, self-giving love. And it is in the context of our relationship to the Father that the way we relate to the rest of the world can be revealed. Number 68, clearly the Bible has no place for a tyrannical anthropocentrism unconcerned with other creatures. And certainly we have often thought about, and a lot of Christian thinking has often thought in a very anthropocentric way, that the human and everything relating to the human and what is good for the human are the only or the major considerations. And the Pope is saying, unless you have human in the context of earth and in the context of community, you really don't have human. And so what is this mystery of the human? How do we get a kind of a proper proportion? And the Holy Father has really some marvelous thinking about evolution and the emergence of humankind. Evolution itself is indicating the nature of creation and the nature of God. What does it mean for a human person to emerge within creation? I mean, we can hear all these things on these science shows, you know, the vastness of the universe and billions of light years this way and that way, and the world can seem very dark and cold, atoms bouncing against each other, irrational, mindless forces. Yet somehow, with this emergence of matter as we have it, there is, with that, this wonderful emergence of humankind, of the capacity to relate, to love, to know, and to give. And this is certainly a marvel of creation, and it shows in a way, it puts a face in a way on what creation itself is all about. In the human wonder, creation is kind of showing what its ultimate meaning can be. Number 81, the sheer novelty involved in the emergence of a personal being within the material universe presupposes a direct action of God and a particular call to life and to relationship on the part of a thou who addresses himself to another thou. The biblical accounts of creation invite us to see each human being as a subject who can never be reduced to the status of an object. So, this is really almost a direct challenge to the default ways in which we have kind of thought about the universe scientifically in terms of matter and forces within matter and how you manipulate matter. The Pope is saying you can't just say matter. Matter itself is personal. Creation itself is personal. Creation itself is driving toward this dialogue between thou and thou, between lover and beloved. And it is that dynamics of personal interconnection and personal love that is infusing the rest of the universe with meaning. There's a way in which we don't understand the value and the beauty of universe until the human emerges, until intelligence and relationship emerges. And so we're talking about all of humanity here. We're talking every human being in some way is mirroring the wonder of existence itself and has the ability to reflect back to a loving God the love that we receive. How can we genuinely teach the importance of concern for other vulnerable beings, however troublesome or inconvenient they are, if we fail to protect the human embryo, even when its presence is uncomfortable and creates difficulty? That there is something in the emergence of the human, and there is obviously something in the processes of the emergence of the human that has to be treated from the point of view of veneration, from the point of view of humble acceptance of the gift. And so, again, this integrity, once I begin to see this personal mystery of relationship between all of existence, I can't put up borders and say this only goes so far and it doesn't go over here, it doesn't go over there. It encompasses all of creation and all of humanity. So there's a way in which our Catholic thinking about the seamless garment of life is kind of morphing, if you will, in this encyclical to the seamless garment of creation. It is not only life that has a continuity that deserves respect, but it is the matrix out of which life comes, creation, in all of its mystery, in all of its potential coldness, but in all of its actual beauty as that is embodied by us, that this gives us clues. So all of humanity, we can't draw fences, we can't say it's only this and not that. And here the Pope is picking up themes that go from St. John Paul II down through Benedict. The culture of relativism is the same disorder which drives one person to take advantage of another, to treat others as mere objects, imposing forced labor on them or enslaving them to pay their debts. The same kind of thinking leads to the sexual exploitation of children, the abandonment of the elderly who no longer serve our interests. It's also the mindset of those who say, let us allow the invisible forces of the market to regulate the economy and consider their impact on society and nature as collateral damage. We're going to be talking quite a bit about the economic pieces when I talk about some of the ways in which this disproportion, this disintegration is manifested. But obviously behind this paragraph, the culture of relativism assumes everything is relative to me. In other words, I can use this, I can use that, but behind all of this, there is this implicit ego that is at the center. And when this implicit ego doesn't see the context of love in which it exists, everything starts falling apart. The way we take advantage of each other, the way we treat others as objects, the way we look at others as labor to do what we want, or as ways for us to become rich, the way we exploit each other, etc. It all ties together. How do I get out of my egocentrism and begin to see this amazing, beautiful context in which I have been created? And here, the body is the way creation becomes real in our own experience. We are fundamentally embodied people, and it is through the body that we give creation a particular manifestation, a particular showing of its wonder. It is enough to recognize that our body itself establishes us in a direct relationship with the environment and with other living beings. The acceptance of our bodies as God's gift is vital for welcoming and accepting the entire world as a gift from the Father and our common home. Whereas thinking that we enjoy absolute power over our own bodies turns, often subtly, into thinking that we enjoy absolute power over creation. That there's a way in which our bodies are gifts to us as well. And our attitude toward creation, that veneration and respect, directly parallels the veneration and respect that we give the human body. It is through the body that we understand how profoundly connected we are to all of matter and to the metaphysical meaning of matter. So this integrity the Pope is talking about goes across all these directions. The person through the body to creation, creation through the body to the person. My body helps me understand the worldly context in which I exist. My body helps me understand the meaning of matter itself, how my body has emerged through evolution from the whole of the universe. Everything that happens from however you think the universe begins, let's say the Big Bang, everything that goes on there in some way has some kind of role in my physical existence. And my physical existence, likewise, is radiating back. And it's very interesting how the Holy Father takes this theme of body and relates it to the Eucharist. At the Eucharist, the celebrant is saying, "This is my body," as he holds up the bread that are the gifts of the earth that we have brought to God. So it is in the Eucharist that all that has been created find its greatest exaltation. Grace, which tends to manifest itself tangibly, found unsurpassable expression when God himself became man and gave himself as food for his creatures. The Lord, in the culmination of the mystery of the Incarnation, chose to reach our intimate depths through a fragment of matter. He comes not from above, but from within. He comes that we might find him in this world of ours. In the Eucharist, fullness is already achieved. It is the living center of the universe, the overflowing core of love and of inexhaustible life. That in Christ, and we'll see how the Pope develops a whole salvation, a way of talking about salvation through Christ. In Christ, God shows the fullness of God's love as our brother. And Christ gives us this fullness of his love through food. If our bodies tie us to the rest of creation, food ties us to the rest of creation too. And it is this whole process that has become the incarnational mystery, whereby God's glory comes about in the kingdom. So here's where the Pope talks about a kind of a Christology, if you will, a way to think about what salvation, this kind of reordering of creation is about. The ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us and through us toward a common point of arrival, which is God. In that transcendent fullness where the risen Christ embraces and illumines all things. Human beings, endowed with intelligence and love and drawn by the fullness of Christ, are called to lead all creatures back to their Creator. So again, just like in the beginning, when the Pope said, if we want to know how to find out our proportion in the world, we need to think about ourselves as children of the Father. Here, he is playing this out in terms of the meaning of evolution and a whole pattern of existence whereby it's not about us and how the universe serves us, but rather it's about how we, part of the universe, in Christ, are part of this wondrous process whereby we achieve our fullness because we come to full relationship with God. And if everything then is moving toward God, human dignity is inherently involved in this movement toward God. No system can completely suppress our openness to what is good, true, and beautiful, or our God-given ability to respond to His grace at work deep in our hearts. I appeal to everyone throughout the world not to forget this dignity which is ours. No one has the right to take it from us. This dignity that we marvelously embodied, marvelously bringing the universe to personal expression in our own existence. We have the ability to relate to the whole of the universe and to relate to the Creator and the Lover and the Savior of the universe. And that then endows us with a gift and a capacity that cannot be suppressed, cannot be downplayed, cannot be made secondary. And along with this ordering towards God, there is an ordering toward each other. In the present condition of global society where injustices abound and growing numbers of people are deprived of basic human rights and considered expendable, the principle of the common good immediately becomes, logically and inevitably, a summons to solidarity and a preferential option for the poorest of our brothers and sisters. There's no surprise here that Pope Francis would say this. This option entails recognizing the implications of the universal destination of the world's goods. But, as I mentioned in my apostolic exhortation, Evangelii Gaudium, it demands before all else an appreciation of the immense dignity of the poor in the light of our deepest convictions as believers. In other words, if this relationship to God is what gives us dignity, and I can't see that dignity because I think people are poor and unworthy, in some way I have missed the point itself. It is the poor, in their very simplicity, that still cry out with even greater passion, still cry out that everyone has a dignity, that everyone is related to absolute love, and this relation to absolute love gives everyone a claim on existence. So I'm going to explore here, as we just look at other parts of this encyclical, the distortions that the Pope is pointing out, and he points to technology, economics, and human power. So these are the ways, if you will, that this anthropological centrism, this disproportion, plays itself out in our actual modern world. Now, obviously, somebody wrote his encyclical on a computer, and somebody put it up on the web, and millions of people have downloaded that. So there's a way in which you cannot look at what the Pope says as a coherent attack on all technology. The Pope, rather, is talking about the attitudes that technology gives us, this attitude that I can control everything just the way I want it, that I am master, and if I cannot dominate something, it's of no use to me. So technology, which linked to business interests, is presented as the only way of solving these problems. In fact, proves incapable of seeing the mysterious network of relationships between things, and so sometimes solves one problem only to create others. I don't think any of us who have worked on computers have experienced, we say, I'm working so much harder. I mean, my system is falling apart, or I can't do this, I can't do that. It would have been easier to just write the envelope out by hand rather than have 8 of them smashed in the printer. But again, it's this sense of when technology is denying this mysterious interconnection, that it becomes a problem. Then later on in the encyclical, technological economic development, which does not leave in its wake a better world and an integrally higher quality of life, cannot be considered progress. And we look at all the heinous things that were done in the 20th century under the guise of progress, and the millions of people whose lives were destroyed. And we know exactly what Pope Francis is talking about. And a little further on, near the end of the encyclical, any technical solution which science claims to offer will be powerless to solve the serious problems of our world if humanity loses its compass, if we lose sight of the great motivations which make it possible for us to live in harmony, to make sacrifices, and to treat others well. Again, the Pope is saying, have your technology, but where is the relational reality, the relational base in which technology makes sense and finds its true meaning? On economics, and there'll be no surprise, I'll have a couple of texts here in terms of economics, we again have distortion. And the Pope is very clear about these things, and we who watch the Wall Street ticker all the time, etc., we especially feel challenged by what he says. The 21st century, while maintaining a system of governance inherited from the past, is witnessing a weakening of the power of the national states, chiefly because the economic and financial sectors, being transnational, tend to prevail over the political. Given this situation, it is essential to devise stronger and more efficiently organized international institutions with functionaries who are appointed fairly by agreement among national governments and empowered to impose sanctions. Now, that's, I could imagine people's heads exploding with that. What are we going to do? But the Pope is pointing to a problem. We used to organize life in terms of nations and what nations want, and kings became constitutions, and constitutions were the ways in which democracy was expressed, etc. But now we have the ability of major institutions in the world to operate above and beyond those national borders. And, just thinking about currency trading and all the ways in which people find one group getting an advantage over another group because they find some little trick they can do with economics, etc. We know that the way the world is set up, people can easily be exploited, and ultimately it's not a fair game. Even more, and this is another take behind what the Pope is saying, saving banks at any cost, making the public pay the price, foregoing a firm commitment to reviewing and reforming the entire system, only reaffirms the absolute power of a financial system, a power which has no future and will only give rise to new crises after a slow, costly, and apparent recovery. The financial crisis of 2007-2008 provided an opportunity to develop a new economy more attentive to ethical principles and new ways of regulating speculative financial practices and virtual wealth. But the response to the crisis did not include rethinking the outdated criteria which continue to rule the world. And why is it outdated? I think if Pope Francis were here, he would say it's outdated because it's not relational. It's outdated because it's a technology that revolves only around its own narrow interests. It's outdated because it thinks profit is the only motive, irrespective of the price that is paid for that profit, not only by creation, not only by the earth, not only by ecological systems, but also by people, and particularly the poorest. Again, in the same section, is it realistic to hope that those who are obsessed with maximizing profits, I wonder who those could be, will stop to reflect on the environmental damage which they will leave behind for future generations? Where profits alone count, there can be no thinking about the rhythms of nature, its phases of decay and regeneration, or the complexity of ecosystems which may be gravely upset by human intervention. And after the Gulf oil spill, we know exactly, we have concrete pictures in our head of exactly what the Pope is talking about. Now, obviously, we live in an economic reality the same way we live in a technological reality. Obviously, without these economic patterns, whole pieces of human interchange could not operate and could not thrive. Obviously, strong economies benefit also the poor. But here the Pope is talking about this disproportion, this distortion, when profit is the only thing we think about. And, certainly all of us shareholders, we all want our little benefits and our dividends and how much did the price go up, et cetera. And that very process of doing that, which infuses money, is also a process whereby all of us may be indirectly paying the price. And then, so we were looking at the distortions in particular, and we looked at the technological, and have we looked at the economic, and now human power itself. Never has humanity had such power over itself, yet nothing ensures that it will be used wisely, particularly when we consider how it is currently being used. We need but think of the nuclear bombs dropped in the middle of the 20th century, or the array of technology which Nazism, communism, and other totalitarian regimes have employed to kill millions of people, to say nothing of the increasingly dead arsenal of weapons available for modern warfare. In whose hands does all this power lie? Or in whose hands will it eventually end up? It is extremely risky for a small part of humanity to have it. That when power, for its own sake, is kind of kept by a few for the sake of that few, we are in a very dangerous situation. Another way to think about this is what the Pope calls the lie, this sense that we can unlimitedly grow, that there is an infinite supply, and therefore there are no limits. Human beings and material objects no longer extend a friendly hand to one another. The relationship has become confrontational. This has made it easy to accept the idea of infinite or unlimited growth, which proves so attractive to economists, financiers, and experts in technology. It is based on the lie that there is an infinite supply of the Earth's goods, and this leads to the planet being squeezed dry beyond every limit. We're finite. Our lives are finite. The world is finite. There is no unlimited number of trees, no unlimited amount of fresh water, no unlimited amount of this or that particular ore or other kind of element, we have to learn how to live with limitations. And one of the ways we learn to live with limitations is by recognizing what is happening to other people when we're not living with those limitations. That is to say, when we forget the relational. And here again, talking about individualism, I think this is a particularly difficult point of self-examination, especially for the wealthier parts of the world. Men and women of our postmodern world run the risk of rampant individualism, and many problems of society are connected with today's self-centered culture of instant gratification. And this is a particularly a sharp knife wound to us. In practice, we continue to tolerate that some consider themselves more human than others, as if they had been born with greater rights. Some of us can use more, some of us deserve more, some of us are richer, some of us are more powerful. Everything should be brought in tribute to us. And when you look at the proportion of usage around the world, there's only so much ice cream in the bowl, and somebody at one end of the table has 3 big scoops, and everybody else is getting a little tablespoonful. Is there a problem with that? Perhaps there is. Here again in 223. In reality, those who enjoy more and live better each moment are those who have given up dipping here and there, always on the lookout for what they do not have. That there is inside of us this insecurity, always looking at our shoulder, over our shoulder. What can I get? I'm insecure. I need more. I got to possess more. I got to control more. I got to dominate more. And again, that disproportion gets replicated. So having kind of reproduced the gospel and the biblical story of the creation and the fall and the effects of the fall, let's just look at elements of restoration. And here the Pope, when he is talking about how this integrity between ourselves, our neighbors, and our world and our God, how this integrity could be restored, lays out the elements of our Christian belief. Jesus was completely present to everyone and to everything. And in this way, he showed us the way to overcome that unhealthy anxiety which makes us superficial, aggressive, and compulsive consumers. That the very openness to Jesus, the very generosity of his openness to others, the very way we know how Jesus continues being open to me today, should in some way prevent me from having to go to the mall and take out my credit card and buy this and buy that and go and put more stuff in my attic and then go out and do the same thing next week. That there is in our modern economic life this disproportion, and to some extent it's a disproportion that comes from a lack of faith. Our need for each other and our shared responsibility also reflect a restoration. We must regain the conviction that we need one another, that we have a shared responsibility for others and the world, and that being good and decent are worth it. We have had enough of immorality and the mockery of ethics, goodness, faith, and honesty. And, there's a way in which there is an accepted cynicism that has grown into a lot of modern discourse, certainly through a lot of media in terms of movies and shows and novels, etc. And the Pope is saying, we, when we are decent to each other, when we are more decent people, have a greater share of happiness. And again, my relationship with my neighbor is reflecting my relationship with God and with the world. Many things have to change, of course, course, but it is we human beings above all who need to change. I mean, what a great way to frame that. We lack an awareness of our common origin, of our mutual belonging, and of a future to be shared with everyone. This basic awareness would enable the development of new convictions, attitudes, and forms of life. A great cultural, spiritual, educational challenge stands before us, and it will demand that we set out on the long path of renewal. That the transformation of humankind, which comes about through conversion, which comes about through the enlightenment that Jesus Christ gives to us in terms of the Father's love, in terms of the Spirit's presence, in terms of the way body and soul, matter and spirit are interrelating with each other, this can create within us a new awareness, a new appreciation of who we are, why we are, and how we live together. Again, in this theme, and when he gets to number 200, the Pope, all the popcorn in the popcorn machine is really, the kernels are going all over the place. And it goes on that way right to the end, number 240, etc. This interested concern for others and the rejection of every form of self-centeredness and self-absorption are essential if we truly wish to care for our brothers and sisters and for the natural environment. These attitudes also attune us to the moral imperative of assessing the impact of our every action and personal decision on the world around us. If we can overcome individualism, we will truly be able to develop a different lifestyle and bring about significant changes in society. So instead of a world where we're all running around thinking we never have enough and pushing ourselves to make more money so we can buy more things and therefore exploit everything all around us, what if we had a world where the point wasn't I need and I gotta have, but rather I see you need and I'm going to give. I see you suffer and I'm going to help. I see you deprived and I'm going to assist. What if we had a world that was not based on self-centeredness and self-absorption? I've not studied economics, so I don't know if the basic point of economics is that people have needs and therefore an economic system develops. But there's a way in which the Pope is inviting us to transcend our needs. And, here the Pope gets kind of mystical near the end of his encyclical. The ideal is not to pass from the exterior to the interior to discover the action of God in the soul, but also to discover God in all things. Now think about that in the kind of instinctual way we Catholics have used the word spirituality, and how that spirituality, through the witness of many saints and through the kind of ways we think about it, is kind of what's going on inside my soul, what are my motives, what have I done, am I truly this, am I truly that, and it leads to kind of a massive self-introspection. And the Pope is saying, fine, have that self-introspection, this way in which God is known and can only be known through the soul. But we have to go beyond that. It's not what's happening inside my head. It's not what's happening inside my heart. It's what God is doing in creation itself. And how I come to contemplate the mystical in the reality of everything, to discover God in all things. And here the Pope links up in some very, very powerful statements near the end, the whole mystery of God, the mystery of the Trinity, and all of our relationships. These words really demand a lot of reflection on our part. The divine persons are subsistent relations, and the world created according to the divine model is a web of relationships. Creatures tend toward God, and in turn it is proper to every living being to tend toward other things, so that throughout the universe we can find any number of constant and secretly interwoven relationships. This leads us not only to marvel at the manifold connections existing among creatures, but also to discover the key to our own fulfillment. that the universe is not a universe of things and mindless forces that move these things around. It is a universe of relationships. And the very heart of that relationship is self-giving love. The very heart of that relationship, the foundation in the Trinity, is a trinity of ever self-giving love. And that becomes the model, if you will, to understand what we are all about. So a relational God creating us in relationship to God and to each other, repairing the broken relationships between ourselves and our creation, leading to a restoration of creation in the kingdom of God. This is the broad pattern, and I think the profoundly evangelical meaning that lies behind Laudato Si. That the Pope is talking in a way through these ecological and environmental patterns, is talking about the whole process of salvation and how that comes to be revealed in a renewed relationship. Again, continuing this number 240, which is really just so deep. The human person grows more, matures more, and is sanctified more to the extent that he or she enters into relationships, going out from themselves to live in communion with God and with others and with all creatures. In this way, they make their own that Trinitarian dynamism which God imprinted in them when they were created. Everything is interconnected. And this invites us to develop a spirituality of that global solidarity which flows from the mystery of the Trinity. And I think the operative phrase there is going out of themselves. Everything that exists finds meaning insofar as it comes to live for another. As a whole way, we could think about evolution as a process whereby matter understands or comes to understand it must give itself up for the other, or else evolution doesn't happen. And this comes from the generous, loving God who has given us existence, a God who is a trinity of selfless, ever-giving relationship. So I know that was a lot to think about there, and I didn't intend for us to exhaust all the thinking in the little time that we spent, but maybe we have a question or two. I know that some people have gotten very sensitive about this because they see it as a kind of an attack on capitalism or attack on modernity or what have you, rather than a call to understand all of these things in relationship. But let's see if we have any questions. Have we got any questions?
Not yet.
Not yet. Look at that. All those big words that were there. We're still trying to absorb this anthropocentrism and all these other great words that are there. So let's just take a couple of moments and see if anybody has a question that we can look at. Excuse me. Is there a question coming in?
There is.
There is a question coming in. Okay. So at least I have some evidence that some people stayed awake through this and can type something back at the end of this encyclical. But I really hope you've come to a greater appreciation of what this encyclical can mean in terms of the various levels of our pastoral work. But we're still waiting for this question to come in.
All right, here we go. I have one from Christian who says, Father, hold on, sorry, I'm just trying to understand what the question is trying to ask.
So
Just be a little patient here till we figure out what the question is.
How can you use technology in moderation? What does that look like?
I think that the answer would be, the Holy Father would say, technology is used in moderation when it understands itself at the service of relationship, and relationship comes first. Now, this can be an enormously profound statement, but it can also be an enormously obvious statement, because the family goes out to dinner, and all of the teenagers have their phones out, and Dad is getting buzzed from this or that one on his BlackBerry, which they used to call Crackberry. I don't know if BlackBerry's gone out of business yet. They keep trying to revive themselves.
We're on iPhones now.
The whole way in which we see these cartoons where people are sitting across the table, instead of talking to each other, they're texting each other. People are first. Relationship is first. Life is first. Love is first. Human need is first. And technology finds its meaning when it allows those relationships to flourish. Just an example from my own life, Facebook, which was enormously problematic for me when I began using it, couldn't understand all these people that wanted to befriend me, who are you, etc. But the ways in which it allows an interconnection at the different points, just in my own life, the interconnection with people that I knew in grade school, with people with whom I was in the seminary, with people from the various assignments I've had over my life, with other professional peers, with others who are articulating the God. I mean, that enriches a set of relationships. I just have to try and move my little scroll faster so I can get through all of the things that are coming in on my news feed. But that's a way in which technology can be of service to relationship. When relationship becomes something that in a way is getting in the way of technology, then it becomes a problem. And people who are working 10 hours a day at the office and then they get home and the emails are still coming in, technology is not serving the relationship, but rather undermining the relationship. Did we get any other questions?
We did.
Great.
They all came in at one time.
Oh, wow.
I have a question that asks, why aren't we hearing more about this encyclical and homilies?
Why? I suspect that priests are still absorbing this encyclical. And, you know, it's quite a read. I think it took me almost 4 days to get through it. And I'm not the slowest reader in the world, but there's a lot to think about. And I think that this may end up being one of the richer veins that ends up. I think another reason why you might not be hearing this in homilies is because a lot of our approach to homilies is like they're admonishing us. There's that guy up there yelling at us once again, or telling us this, or berating us for that. And, you know, we can all feel very, very guilty about the way, in particular, we live in this first world where, you know, we have a disposable economy and reality around us. And so maybe priests are trying to figure out how to say this thing without it just sounding like you're wrong, you're bad, shame on you, you're a selfish thing, or what have you. So that might be part of it too. But I mean, as you could see when you look at this encyclical, it has so much to say in terms of what it means to be human and how we are interconnected. Another question?
Yes, and this one is from Father Charlie.
Father Charlie, okay.
So, all right. Well, acknowledging the interrelationship of financial sectors and political systems, how can political systems be trusted more than financial systems? The invisible hand of bureaucracy is as threatening as the market, isn't it?
Oh, I think as we enter this this political thing, and we've seen how abstract the whole process of choosing leadership is in this country, I think that the exploitational possibilities behind politics and the way in which that colludes with our information systems. In other words, if I'm running a 24-hour news station, I get paid by putting stuff up all the time, or else people aren't going to watch my station. And so I have to go out and, in a way, stir the pot so that I continue to have more newsworthy stories, et cetera. In the process of stirring that pot, I am very often pandering to one or another sector or one or another attitude, et cetera. And it's very easy to lose proportion. If there's a loss of proportion in terms of technology, if there's a loss of proportion in terms of economics, the loss of proportion in terms of our civic discourse, everybody's been commenting on that, is just enormous. How we have, over the past 10 years, we have come to think of the way we talk about things as one shouting head yelling at another shouting head, and it goes back and forth like that, like it's a ping pong game. So what if we, in our political system, approached reality not from the point of view of opposition, but from the point of view of veneration? And what if what I was called to venerate was not only the other person, but also the human reality that the other person lived in? Maybe if all of us began to acknowledge our common limitations, then we could get to a more civil discourse, because we're actually looking at each other and trying to understand the needs of each other, rather than find some point where I'm going to beat you down and prove that you're wrong, and my party will get elected and we'll be able to change everything, and too bad for you, which seems to be the way a lot of politics is construed on all of the sides. I mean, what if we were a more venerating political reality? How different would that be? Okay, do we have any others?
We got one more.
One more, okay. Because we're getting beyond the magic hour.
This one. What are some practical ways that the teachings of Laudato Si provide opportunities for evangelization?
I think one of the practical ways, and there was in fact a long article written about this in a magazine that probably not many people read, called Theological Studies, 2 years ago. People do have concern for the environment. They may not be able to follow all of the arguments that theism and atheism and all of the philosophical this and that, but they know when the world is hurting. They know when people are in need. They know when we're running out of things. And so just by calling people to service, I am calling them to be in contact with a community that expresses love through service. And in the process of that service, they begin to see the ones who are serving. They begin to see what motivates the people who are serving and loving, and therefore they can begin to get insight into the God who is absolute love, that is in fact motivating believers. And so I think through elements of our common need and through elements of our common service, we have a way to draw people who may be tired of religious arguments into a practical mode of living that in fact opens them up to a more explicit awareness of God. So thank you for that question there, and I think we're ready to go on, because we have a couple of announcements to make here. Upcoming webinars, Tools for Invitation, September 24th at 3 o'clock. I'll be doing that webinar, and I'll be looking at ways in which we need to become an inviting church, and if we are going to be an inviting church, what are the tools that we can use? And we'll be introducing, I think, a very exciting video there as a way to see how we can project ourselves as Catholic people. And then Reaching Inactive Catholics, which I'll be doing again on October 8th. And this is a kind of a relaunching of Awakening Faith, a program that has touched the lives of thousands of people already. And really, it's certainly not the be-all or the end-all or the magic bullet, but it is one resource in our greater and greater need to reach inactive Catholics, and we haven't begun as a church to do what we should be doing. You can register by going PEMDC.org webinars.
Actually, PEMDC/webinar. It's a slight typo. It's also in the link section if you would like to visit it right now.
Okay.
Just one webinar when you type in the URL.
Yes. Go up to the link section, and we do have typos, unfortunately. And then a little sale that we're having. We have this wonderful book that is a collection of meditations by a really tremendous disciple who died a few years ago, David Thorpe. And these have been collected, and these are beautiful reflection books, beautiful meditation books. And I think if any of us are involved in the RCIA, and we have people who are kind of beginning to inquire, etc., these are beautiful gifts that are fairly inexpensive that we can be giving people to help them think about God and God's relationship to the self and my relationship to creation through God. And so you can order those. There's the link down there, and there's even a 15% discount. And I think particularly as the catechumenal process begins, this could be a wonderful resource for you. And that's the end of our webinar. Thanks so much for being with us. We're going to stop the recording, and you'll be able to get a link and share that link with others. Bless you.